It's the Beth Cahill Show. And now, here's Beth.
Good morning and welcome to the Beth Cahill Show. We have so much to cover today. Last week was a busy week across the country with elections happening all over, and I'm here to get into all of that with you and then some. What initiatives passed, who won, and what it all means for you. So let's start in Seattle. Much to my dismay, almost all of the very progressive candidates won these races. The faction, though, that wasn't as lucky when it came to, the progressives and what they were winning was the initiatives that passed. So I didn't necessarily know how Initiative I-96 was going to go, and it actually passed. And also surprising to me was the affirmative action referendum was rejected. So I-976 passed. As of the last update, it actually passed with about 51% of the vote. So this was the initiative that would cut car tab taxes to a flat rate of $30. Sounds amazing, right? I don't know who's paid for taxes, for their car tabs lately, but it's not cheap. Keep in mind that in order for them to have even gotten the ballot on the measure, they needed to come up with 350,000 signatures. So they do that. They come up with 350,000 signatures. They get it on the ballot, and it overwhelmingly passes on election night. So there was an obvious appetite for this. And what it says to me is that the people were tired of overpaying for their car tabs each year. And it showed on election night. So this is a highly, highly contested initiative, right? The legal challenges have already begun. They literally began talking about how to block this passage on election night. Mayor Jenny Durkan has called it unconstitutional. She said she's going to be doing what she can to block it. You then have people like Dow Constantine saying it also needs to get challenged. You've got the Sound Transit Agency weighing in, threatening litigation. So in other words, you've got really powerful people and powerful agencies wanting to go against the will of what the people voted on election night. Sound Transit's in disarray right now. They're trying to figure out how they're going to make this all work. You've got the Washington State Department of Transportation, the City of Seattle, and Sound Transit all looking at massive, massive funding gaps with the passage of this. So, but honestly, the most frustrating part about this is that this could have been fixed with legislation. There has been legislation, actually 3 proposals to be exact, on the desk of lawmakers that dealt with car tabs in some way or another. And every proposal was ignored. They never even brought a full vote on any of them. So to me, they've had opportunities to fix the car tab situation over the years, and they've chose to ignore it. Well, now the problem's on their doorstep, right? They have to figure this out at some point, and it passed. So they can't ignore it any longer. And the problem, it seems like the way that this is set up, right? You've got Sound Transit putting a value on your car, an overly inflated value, I might add. And then they're taxing you based on the value of what your vehicle is. And again, it's an overly inflated value. So they're, again, in a situation that they haven't been in before. They now have to try to figure out a way to deal with this and figure out a way to recap this money, because this money was going to fund transportation. But you know how many people have had to try to scramble to come up with the money to pay for their car tabs every year? Car tabs range anywhere from $200, $300, $400, $500, even into $1,100 and $1,200, depending on the vehicle that you have. The more luxury vehicles are paying upwards of $1,200 to $1,500 to even $2,000 for their car tabs. The other interesting part about this is the counties that voted the way that they did. You had Pierce County and Snohomish County voting overwhelmingly yes to pass this initiative. And who can blame them, right? They are paying these massive taxes on these car tabs for a transportation system that's doing little to benefit them, if anything. It's just gross. It's the arrogance of these agencies and these politicians in Seattle is just, it's astounding, and it never seems to surprise me. So we'll keep our eyes on that. There's already, like I said, there's legal challenges that are already happening. They've already filed a lawsuit to get this to basically go away and to block it. So I will definitely keep you updated as that lawsuit continues and see how that works out. Moving on, though, to affirmative action, which was the referendum 88. This is the measure that would allow race to have played a role in government hiring and race to play a role in the placement at universities. And it actually failed to pass. This one I was actually pretty shocked about because, we live in Seattle. I just assumed that this would have been something that would have passed. And it was rejected by actually 50.4% of the vote. Worked out to be around 13,000, give or take, of actual votes. So the measure was actually losing in all 4 of the 39 counties in Washington state. But where it had really strong support is obviously the most heavily populated King County. So King County was really the only thing that was keeping that close. So again, referendum 88, it failed to pass. Moving on, though, to Seattle City Council races. So it turns out that Seattle's appetite for change wasn't all that high. All of the incumbents were voted back in, literally all 3. And the other 4 races, 3 of the 4 more progressive candidates won. So here are the results. We'll go through them quickly. In District 1, you had West Seattle. You had incumbent Lisa Herbold, who we've talked about on this show a lot, actually. She beat Phil Tavel by almost 12 points. I mean, that wasn't a race that was even close. That's in West Seattle. They're dealing with their own challenges with the homelessness and the crime and things of that nature. And Lisa was able to hold on to her seat. In District 2, you had incumbent Tammy Morales beating Mark Solomon, and she beat him by almost 22%. So Mark was running, he was the lifelong guy that had grown up in Beacon Hill. He was trying to take that district. He'd born and raised there. And yeah, she beat him by 22%, again, being the incumbent coming back. And then District 3, we had incumbent Shama Sawant, who was, she's been the most controversial figure in Seattle politics for several years now, and she beat Egan O'Ryan. She carried 52% of the vote, so she won by the least amount of the incumbents in kind of a stunning victory because she was down by almost 10 percentage points on election night, and it was the mail-in ballots that came in later that crossed her over the line for victory. So moving on to District 4, you had Alex Peterson. He is the only slightly moderate in the council to win. He beat Sean Scott, but again, he only won by 4 percentage points. So that was a close race there as well. And then you had District 5, which is incumbent Deborah Juarez, who beat Ann Davison Sattler, and she beat her handily by 21%. District 6, you had Dan Strauss, who was the more progressive candidate, beating Heidi Willis by about 12 points. And then District 7, you had Andrew Lewis beat Jim Hugel by 6%. So what does it all mean, right? Does it mean that after all the hype, right, you have Seattle is dying, everyone talking about how angry people are in Seattle about the state of the city, and then on election night, it doesn't seem to be the case, right? So either Seattle voters aren't really all that upset about the state of the city, or they're upset about it, but they believe that the solutions actually lie with the progressive candidates to fix it. I mean, either one are plausible. I don't have the answer for that. Time is going to tell as far as that goes. Voters don't seem to believe that the current council members had much to do with what's going on. That seemed abundantly clear on election night. So the only other piece that I guess you could kind of tie into this is, and maybe honestly a more important piece of this is the uneven growth that is taking place in some of these city council districts. So you had record turnout, though. I don't want to take anything away from election night because there was record turnout. The turnout actually beat the turnout in the mayor's race in 2017. So, but what I will say that's a fair and valid point is that some districts are growing at a rapid pace compared to other districts, right? Back in 2013, the city switched from citywide to district elections back in 2013. And when they did this, all of the districts were actually fairly even in numbers. So when this all happened, they had fairly even numbers in each of the districts as far as population goes, right? So since then, as Seattle grows, obviously these districts are growing. So it's just the rate in how fast some of the districts are growing that has become, kind of a sore spot for some of the voters living in these districts. Because here's what I mean by this. When you draw up these districts, representation on the city council, it was meant to be equal across all districts. And again, it started out that way. So when they drew up these districts, representation on city council was meant to be equal across all districts. And again, it started out that way, but it changed quickly. So each district has obviously grown at a different rate, but still by large percentages in growth, ranging anywhere from you've got 10% being the smallest district that has grown to 40%, another district having grown by 40%. So that would mean in that district, the one that grew by 40%, it's almost 26,000 more people. What does that mean? Well, it means that the representation by city council isn't quite that equal anymore, right? You've got, and the reason that this matters, and the example that was made, actually, I read this in the Seattle Times. I've read a lot about this, but Seattle Times did a great job of kind of breaking this down. The reason that this matters is you take District 7, who has seen the biggest increase in population. It makes up South Lake Union neighborhood, which makes up a large percentage of what? Multi-level homes. It makes up a large percentage of the condos coming in. And most of the people making those up are renters. Versus the other part of that same district, which is Queen Anne and Magnolia. Well, what are those? You've got single family homes. So there hasn't been a ton of growth. You got one family moving in, one family moving out. The growth isn't really happening in places like that where you've got all these new constructions coming in, like, the example of South Lake Union. So South Lake Union has seen the increase in population, and therefore the single family homes in places like Magnolia and Queen Anne, who have strong opposition to zoning, they have less of a say because the growth is coming from these downtown neighborhoods. So, the same can be said for Shama Sawant's district that she just held on to. The majority of the population is going to lie in the downtown and Capitol Hill areas. Those areas are made up of what? Same thing. A younger demographic, primarily renters and transit users. Whereas you've got the homeowners in Madison Park and Leshigh, they're going to have a less of a say of what goes on. These are all the people like in the same district. So that therein lies the problem with what some of these voters are feeling. They're just feeling like their voices are less heard than the bigger portions of their same district. So this is a trend that's projected to continue as time goes on. It's not until 2022 that these districts are going to get redrawn. And at that point, they're going to try to evenly draw these, with even population representing the district. So it's definitely something to continue watching. I'm kind of a nerd in that way. I love seeing and watching the trends in these neighborhoods and the differences in demographic and what makes people vote some way as opposed to people in the same district voting another. So I will keep watching this as well because I think it's fascinating stuff. So moving on, though, to some national news and election results. We had also a couple weeks ago the Kentucky governor's race. It was a highly anticipated race. The GOP actually did very well in Kentucky. They swept the ticket there, with the exception of the governor's race, where actually they're going to have a new governor, a Democratic governor in Andy Beshear. Matt Bevin actually just conceded this race a couple of days ago, but ultimately the Democratic candidate won. He was a very popular candidate. He was the sitting attorney general, and his family had a long history there. So he won that race. The GOP had a great night, though. For the first time in 70 years, Kentucky voted in a Republican as their attorney general. So it was historic in that sense. It was also historic, and it was the first African-American to hold that position as well. So if you are just tuning in, you are listening to the Beth Cahill Show, and we are going over election results that have trickled in over the last couple of weeks, locally and nationally. The GOP also won the governor's race in Mississippi, where Tate Reeves actually is going to be the next governor there. And the other race that drew national attention and actually was the Virginia race, where the Democrats actually routed the GOP. There were landmark victories in both the Senate and the House of Delegates. The Democrats picked up 2 seats in the Senate for a 1-seat majority, and the gains that they made in the House actually give the Democrats a 55-45 advantage over the Republicans in Virginia. I mean, Virginia is just as blue as it gets now. That's always been kind of a purple state. It's been trending blue, but it's blue. And that was very apparent on election night. So people are saying that this is all, an indication of what 2020 is going to look like. I actually don't really believe that. Some of the thoughts that I have on these elections, though, is the first thought is the GOP is still very popular in GOP states, right? They're really popular in the red states. That continues to be a trend for them. My second thought, though, is that the Republicans are not as popular with suburban women as they used to be. This is not something that should be ignored either. I think that strategists for Republicans should pay very, very close attention to this, because it is going to be a problem for them in 2020 if they can't turn it around. We saw it in the House in 2018, and we saw glimpses of it in the Tuesday election a couple of weeks ago. Suburban women used to be a stronghold for Republicans. They were kind of a sure thing. But again, that's no longer. They have less than a year to fix this problem. And if I was counseling Trump or the GOP, not that I am, but if I was, I would say, go into these areas, go into the places that you are unpopular and deliver your message. I strongly believe that Republicans have a better message than the Democrats on so many things. They have, and they now have the opportunity to go take that message to college-educated suburban women. I know people like to talk a lot about women's issues, right? Women's issues. But being an educated suburban female myself, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that women's issues are actually the same as most people's issues, right? As a female, I care about, what is it that I care about? I care about national security. I care about the economy. I care about education. I care about healthcare, maintaining my Second Amendment right. And poll after poll shows that those are the top issues for most voters in this country. And if you take those issues alone, hands down, GOP wins. The economy is the best that it has ever been. Unemployment for minorities and women is the lowest it has ever been. The GOP has a strong national security message. Their opposition's message isn't even really a message, and it's certainly not something that resonates with most people. Sure, it resonates with, their base and the people on Twitter, but that is not mainstream America. Even if you believe in fair immigration laws, which I do, the Democrats are not doing their job in just the basics, which is protecting our border. Most Americans believe that we should have strong border security. That is not a controversial statement. Where it gets controversial is the different ideas that people have about how to achieve that, right? You got some people that believe that you need a wall. You've got other people that believe you need drones or, border patrol agents lining the border. That's where Americans disagree, is they disagree about how they want strong security, but they don't disagree that they want strong border security. As far as healthcare goes, I wouldn't have always said that the GOP wins this message, but as of lately, with what the Democrats are proposing and what they're offering in Medicare for all, with the exception of maybe Buttigieg and Biden, they're all offering Medicare for all, which would take away your private insurance. Most Americans don't want their private insurance taken away. They don't want to not have a choice in how they're insured. Not to mention it would bankrupt the country with a price tag ranging anywhere from 32 to 50 trillion. I mean, point is, Republicans have the better message. So go into these suburban neighborhoods and begin delivering that message. Because if you don't, you will see more of the same in 2020's election. It's not an option to lose suburban women. I'm going to move on a little bit to the impeachment saga that continues, right? I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the impeachment stuff just because I can already tell you what's going to happen here. It's going to be a House impeachment and a Senate acquittal. There it is. That's what's going to happen. The Democrats are too far in to go back now, right? So they have to go through with impeaching this president. Otherwise, they will commit political suicide with their base. And my thoughts on this is that their objective is really just they know it's dead in the Senate, right? So their objective here is to really just wound the president going into an election year. They know it's dead in the Senate. They know it's going to go nowhere, but they'll go through with it anyway, because it's sort of like, the phrase death by 1,000 cuts. If they wound the president enough, they hope it will up their chances for a White House victory in 2020. After the impeachment hearings were made public this week, the Democrats and Republicans both came out of those meetings claiming victory. If you had the chance to watch it, which I did, you would know that it was actually quite a snooze fest. There wasn't any big bombshell that was dropped. The star witness was about 6 people removed from the situation. I'm going to play a clip for you from Jim Jordan. He does a great job in explaining what this actually sounds like and how far removed these star witnesses actually were.
And then what you have in front of you is an addendum that Mr. Sondland made to his testimony that we got a couple weeks ago. It says, Declaration of Ambassador Gordon Sondland. I, Gordon Sondland, do hereby swear and affirm as follows. I want you to look at point number 2, bullet point number 2, second sentence. Ambassador Taylor recalls that Mr. Morrison told Ambassador Taylor that I told Mr. Morrison that I conveyed this message to Mr. Yarmak on September 1st, 2019 in connection with Vice President Pence's visit to Warsaw and a meeting with President Zelensky. Now, this is his clarification. Let me read it one more time. Ambassador Taylor recalls that Mr. Morrison told Ambassador Taylor that I told Mr. Morrison that I conveyed this message to Mr. Yarmak on September 1st, 2019 in connection with Vice President Pence's visit to Warsaw and a meeting with President Zelensky. We got 6 people having 4 conversations in one sentence, and you just told me this is where you got your clear understanding. Which, I mean, even though you had 3 opportunities with President Zelensky for him to tell you, you know what, we're going to do these investigations to get the aid. Didn't tell you 3 different times. Never makes an announcement, never tweets about it, never does a CNN interview. Ambassador, you weren't on the call, were you? The president, you didn't listen on President Trump's call and President Zelensky's call?
I did not.
You've never talked with Chief of Staff Mulvaney?
I never did.
You never met the president?
That's correct.
I mean, thank God for Jim Jordan if you're a Republican, because he has a way with words, which is why they moved him to this committee so that he would be able to ask these questions, because that's how it sounds, right? You've got, this guy is about, again, he's the star witness. He's about 6 people removed from this situation. And I just don't know how you make a case to impeach a president with all of the witnesses having no direct knowledge. They can try, and they will. Again, they're going to impeach him. It's not a question of whether they're going to. They're going to. What they're trying to do now is sell it to the American people. That's what these public hearings are for. And if you wonder just how political this is, if you notice for the last month, right, the only word you were hearing from everyone was quid pro quo. It's the only word we heard. When that didn't seem to move the needle on public opinion, the Democrats, this is no joke, this is serious, they did this. The Democrats put together a focus group, right? Much like you would do in a political campaign. You put a focus group together, you see what you test with regular Americans, what words work and what words seem to get a reaction from people. So they tested out several words to see which ones would be most devastating to the president, and they went with that. So prepare yourself, because the word that tested well was bribery. Prepare yourself to hear the word bribery by the mainstream media and the Democrats for the remainder of these hearings, because that was the word that tested well. You can't make this stuff up. So I think the Democrats really have to come up with something more than what we've seen this week. Maybe they will in the next set of hearings, but if they don't, I think they're going to fail to show the public once again. And when I refer to Republic, I'm more speaking about independence. Most people already have their minds made up on this issue if you know where you stand with the president or with the Democrats. Who the Democrats need to sway are the independents out there. And I'm just unsure that the hearings this week did that. But it's definitely something we will continue watching and monitoring. So for me, I am almost out of time today. But next week, I want to spend some time on talking about the decline in the family unit and how this decline is affecting our society. It is a fascinating topic, and I hope you will tune in again next week.
This has been the Beth Cahill Show. If you have any feedback for Beth or would like to suggest a future topic or guest for the show, email beth@thebethcahillshow.com. That's Beth at @thebethcahill, spelled CAHILL, show.com. Tune in again next Saturday morning at 9 for more of the Beth Cahill Show, right here on AM 1590. The Answer.